When I was growing up in the early 70s, was a popular TV personality, Flip Wilson, in his alter ego Geraldine, would use this catchphrase: "What you see is what you get." It came to mind because it contrasts so much with what we just heard in the gospel this morning. What we see is not what we get. We just heard how Jesus, teaching in his hometown synagogue, astonished the people. He had been doing amazing things, yet the people who thought they knew him best, in fact, really didn't. While he was teaching with great wisdom and authority, the hometown folk were confused. Wasn't he the carpenter, the son of Mary, they asked. How can this be? What they saw was not what they got. This disconnect between what they saw and expected was very different from what was happening. And this was because, as we heard, a certain weakness or a lack to some degree of faith. Without faith, they could not see and understand what was really happening. So what can we learn from this? What reflections might we have about our faith, our expectations as to who Jesus is, and to what the church is? When do we encounter Jesus, and how do we see him in relation to ourselves? You know, as bodily creatures, right, almost everything we learn and experience occurs through our senses. What we see, what we hear. But this isn't entirely how we know things, right? Especially when it comes to faith in our spiritual life. And in particular, this is most evident when it comes to the sacraments, because of God's grace and the action of that grace working in such a way that what we see or hear is not exactly what we receive. In the Eucharist, for example, right? What we see are bread and wine. What we receive is the body and blood of Christ. In confession, after we say we're sorry for X, Y, Z, what we hear are words spoken by the priest. What we receive is healing, forgiveness, and absolution. How can this be, we might ask, like the people we just heard in the gospel? What they saw and thought they knew based on appearances was not at all the reality. Are we, or would we be like Jesus' hometown people who thought they knew him but really didn't understand what was happening? Whether we see ourselves like them or not, the message is the same. Be open to God's grace working all around us. Cultivate a sensitivity to seeing and hearing with eyes and ears of faith so as to encounter God who is in our midst. What we see is not what we get, and that's perfectly fine, because the invisible and no less real action of God's grace, as Paul in the second reading reminds us, is all we really need. God's grace is sufficient. And in our faith, which enables us to see with clarity the effects of God's grace in us and in the lives of those we encounter around us. With faith, we won't be confused like Jesus' hometown people. With faith, we'll grow ever more closely in a relationship with Him as we continue to receive the many graces God bestows upon us. Shortly, we'll come to the foot of the altar to receive the body and blood of Christ. What appears to be a small wafer of bread is not at all what we get. With faith, pray to recognize Jesus Christ and receive the graces He wishes to lavish upon us.